"You want a piece of my new house?" I said with an irony they couldn't detect. "Fine, you can have it all." I threw the keys at Chloe. They landed right at her feet, and she snatched them off the floor with a speed that surprised me. She seemed terrified I might change my mind at any second. Along with the keys, I placed the piece of paper with the handwritten address on the table. Chloe grabbed it with both hands, read the whole thing, and when she finished, her face lit up with a satisfaction she didn't even try to hide. She smiled, that wide, triumphant smile she had been holding back for months. She turned to Michael, my son, and showed him the keys as if they were a winning lottery ticket. He just nodded, no particular expression, as if this were simply the natural outcome of something they had planned all along. Neither of them looked at me. Neither said thank you. She simply slipped the keys into her pocket, and they both headed for the stairs. I heard her tell Michael, her voice thrilled, that they had to go pack everything immediately, that they could finally move, that it was about time. The sound of their footsteps echoed on the second floor as they started shoving their clothes into bags, gathering their belongings, preparing for what they believed would be their new life in my house. Their voices drifted down to where I stood, fragments of conversation filled with plans and expectations. I just stood there in the middle of my living room, alone. The silence surrounding me was thick, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of someone who has just made a decision they will not regret. I looked up at the stairs where they had disappeared and felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't regret. It was something like release. But let me take you back. Let me tell you how I got to this moment. How a mother who gave every piece of her life ended up being seen as an obstacle standing between two ambitious people and a property worth a fortune. How a mother's love became a bargaining chip, and how gratitude evaporated the moment 4 walls and a roof came into play. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 62 years old. This house where I'm standing, this 3-story property with a yard and big windows, I paid for it with 30 years of my life. I bought it with my husband, Arthur, when Michael was barely 7 years old and used to run through these hallways without a care in the world. Every brick in these walls represents an extra hour of work, a skipped meal, a silent sacrifice. Arthur and I worked tirelessly to get it. He worked 2 jobs. I worked as an administrative assistant during the day and sewed clothes at night for extra money. We slept little. We ate just enough. We denied ourselves any luxury. Everything was for Michael. Everything was to give him what we never had as children. This house was the proof that we had made it, that our son would grow up in a stable and secure home. Arthur died 10 years ago. A sudden heart attack one afternoon while he was tending the garden. He collapsed among the plants he cared for so much, without pain, without warning. He left me this house, some savings, and Michael, who at that moment swore at his father's grave that he would always be with me, that he would never leave me alone, that he would take care of me just as I had cared for him. Promises sound beautiful when they're spoken. The problem is remembering them when something more attractive comes along. The first few years after losing Arthur were difficult but bearable. Michael came to visit often. We had lunch together on Sundays. We talked about his father, about memories, about life. I clung to those visits like a drowning person clings to a piece of wood in the middle of the ocean. My son was the only thing keeping me whole after my husband's death. 6 years ago, Michael met Chloe at a work conference. She was one of those women who knows exactly how to present herself, always put together, always with the right word, always smiling at just the right moment. He introduced her to me 3 months after they met, and I welcomed her with open arms. I cooked special dinners, organized family gatherings, and did everything possible to make her feel like part of the family. When they decided to get married, Michael told me he hadn't saved enough money. Chloe wanted a big, elegant wedding with lots of guests. I took almost $20,000 out of my savings to help them. $20,000 I had saved for years for emergencies. But seeing my son happy was worth every penny. Or so I thought at the time. The first 2 years were normal. They came to visit. We shared meals. They talked about their plans. Chloe called me Mom in that sweet tone that made me feel loved. I helped them financially when they needed it, bought things for their apartment, gave them money for their expenses. It was my way of showing love, my way of being useful in their lives. But 2 years ago, something changed. The visits became less frequent, the calls shorter. And I started to notice something in Chloe's eyes every time she walked into my house. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the walls, the furniture, the rooms. Her eyes scanned every space in my house as if she were calculating something in her mind. She measured distances with her gaze, observed the high ceilings, touched the walls like someone assessing the quality of a building. At first, I thought it was simple curiosity. Maybe admiration for the house where her husband grew up. How wrong I was. Michael started to change, too. He didn't talk to me like he used to. His conversations became mechanical, repetitive, full of empty phrases that said nothing real. And then he started with the comments. Comments that at first sounded like genuine concern, but over time revealed their true intention. "Mom, this house is just too big for you all by yourself. Mom, those stairs are dangerous at your age. Mom, keeping up a property like this must be costing you a fortune. Mom, you should really think about downsizing, something smaller, easier to take care of." I listened to those comments and felt a knot in my stomach that I didn't know how to interpret. I told myself my son was worried about me, that he wanted what was best for his mother, that it was normal for him to think about my safety. But there was something in his tone, something in the way Chloe nodded every time he spoke, that made me doubt. The visits became strange. They weren't coming to see me anymore. They were coming to inspect the house. Chloe would walk through the rooms with flimsy excuses. She wanted to see how the bathroom turned out after I remodeled it. She needed ideas for decorating their apartment. She loved the garden and wanted to take pictures. But I saw her. I saw her opening cabinets, looking inside closets, asking how much it cost to replace the windows, how much I paid in upkeep, if the house had any structural problems. One afternoon, a year and a half ago, Chloe arrived with a folder full of papers. She sat in my living room and started showing me brochures for assisted living facilities. Beautiful places, she said, with gardens, with nurses available, with recreational activities. Places where I would have company, where I wouldn't have to worry about maintaining such a big house. Michael was by her side, nodding, supporting every word his wife said. I felt something break inside me in that moment. I looked at my son, the man who came from my body, the one I nursed, the one I cared for when he had a high fever for 3 nights in a row, the one I hugged every time he cried, the one I applauded at every achievement in his life. And that man was looking at me as if I were a problem that needed a solution. I didn't say anything that day. I took the brochures, put them on the table, and served them coffee as if nothing had happened. But that night, after they left, I sat on my bed and cried until my chest hurt. I cried for Arthur, who wasn't there to see what our son had become. I cried for myself, for having been so blind. And I cried for Michael, for turning into someone I no longer recognized. After that afternoon, things got worse. Chloe started to be more direct. She no longer disguised her intentions with sweet words. She began to talk openly about how unfair it was to pay rent when this huge house existed with empty rooms. About how tired she was of living in a small apartment. About how much she would love to have her own yard, space to have guests, a bigger kitchen. Michael backed up every word. "Mom, it would be good for everyone. Mom, you'd be more comfortable in a smaller place. Mom, we could take care of the house. Mom, think about it. It would be the best thing for the family." I listened to them in silence. I nodded my head. I said I would think about it. But inside, something was changing. A part of me that had always been soft and agreeable began to harden. A voice in my head that used to be quiet was now screaming the truth I didn't want to accept. They don't care about me. They just want my house. I started paying more attention, noticing details I had ignored before. Like the way Chloe took pictures of every corner of my house and showed them to her friends. How Michael asked about the property documents, whether there was any mortgage left, whose name everything was in. How the two of them spoke in low voices when they thought I wasn't listening, making plans, discussing strategies. One night, I overheard part of a phone conversation. Chloe was talking to someone, probably a friend, and said things that stuck in my soul like needles. "She's old and stubborn," she said. "She doesn't get that the house is too much for her, but we've almost got her convinced. It's just a matter of time. That house should be ours. Michael is an only son. It'll be ours eventually anyway. I stood frozen on the other side of the door. I felt the air leave my lungs. My heart beat so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. So that's how they saw me. As a temporary obstacle. As someone old and stubborn who was taking up space they considered theirs. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed awake staring at my bedroom ceiling, the same room I shared with Arthur for 20 years, the same one where he died in my arms after they brought him home from the hospital. I thought about everything I had sacrificed for Michael. The sleepless nights when he was a baby, the extra jobs to pay for a good school, the times I ate less so he could eat more. How I sold the jewelry Arthur gave me to pay for his college tuition. And now here I was, alone in my house, with a son who saw me as a burden and a daughter-in-law who was counting the days to take what wasn't hers. But something else was born in me that night. Something cold and calculating I had never felt before. If they wanted to play dirty, I could too. If they saw me as an old woman who was easy to manipulate, I would give them exactly that image. And when they least expected it, I would teach them that underestimating a mother is the biggest mistake they could ever make. I started to act differently. Weaker, more confused. I complained about aches I didn't have. I said the stairs made me very tired. That maintaining the house was exhausting. That maybe they were right. That maybe I did need something smaller. Chloe and Michael exchanged satisfied glances every time I said those things. They thought they were finally achieving their goal. That the stubborn old woman was giving in. How wrong they were. While they thought they were convincing me, I was making my own plans. I started reviewing all the house documents. The property deeds were in my name. Only my name. Arthur and I had decided that years ago for legal and tax reasons. Michael had no right to this house as long as I was alive. And even though he was my only heir, that didn't mean I couldn't do whatever I wanted with my property. One morning, while they were at work, I went to the bank. I spoke with the manager, a man named Mr. Harrison, who had known me for years. I explained my situation without going into too much detail. I just told him I needed to organize my finances and wanted to explore my options. He listened attentively and gave me several useful pieces of advice. I also started researching the real value of my house. I hired an appraiser who came one day when I knew Michael and Chloe wouldn't show up. The man went over every inch of the property, took photographs, made measurements. When he gave me the final report, I almost fell out of my chair. My house was worth $450,000. $450,000 for a property we had bought for $90,000 30 years ago. That number gave me power. It gave me clarity. It made me understand exactly why Chloe looked at my house with those greedy, shining eyes. Why Michael had changed so much. It wasn't just a house. It was a fortune. A fortune they wanted without paying a single cent. The visits became more frequent. They didn't wait for an invitation anymore. They showed up whenever they wanted, stayed for hours, and acted as if they already owned the place. Chloe started rearranging things. She moved furniture around and said it was to help me, that it looked better that way. She moved things in the kitchen, saying it was more practical. Michael would inspect the yard and make comments about which trees needed to be cut down, what part of the patio could be remodeled. I let them. I watched them in silence as they played the part of future owners of something that didn't belong to them. Every action they took was one more confirmation of what I already knew. They didn't love me. They loved what I had. One afternoon, Chloe arrived with her mother, a woman named Barbara, just as fake as her daughter. They sat in my living room and started talking about interior design, about how this house had so much potential, how with a few changes, it could look modern and elegant. Chloe's mother went so far as to say that the curtains I had were hideous and that they all needed to be replaced, that the color of the walls was too old-fashioned. I served tea and cookies. I smiled. I nodded. Inside, I was boiling with rage, but on the outside, I remained calm. I let them talk all they wanted. I let them plan their future in my house, because I knew something they didn't, that this whole charade was for nothing. That same week, I contacted a real estate agency. Not just any agency. I looked for the most discreet one that worked with clients who valued privacy. I spoke with an agent named Susan, a woman my age who understood my situation without me having to explain too much. I told her part of the story. I told her I needed to sell quickly and in absolute silence. Susan didn't ask unnecessary questions. She told me she knew buyers who were looking for exactly this type of property. People with money who could close deals with cash without a lot of paperwork. She explained that we could do everything legally but quickly. That in a matter of 3 weeks, I could have the money in my account if we found the right buyer. I gave her the green light. We signed the representation papers. She started working immediately. We scheduled the viewings for the potential buyers at times when I knew Michael and Chloe wouldn't be around. On Tuesday and Thursday mornings, when both of them were at their jobs, 4 different couples came to see the house. The third couple fell in love with the place. They were a young, professional couple, no kids yet. They wanted something large with room to grow. They offered $430,000 in cash. They could close in 2 weeks. I accepted immediately. While all this was happening, Michael and Chloe kept increasing the pressure. They weren't just suggesting I move anymore. They started demanding it in more direct ways. One night, during a dinner I cooked for them, Chloe dropped the direct question. "So, Mom, have you thought about what we talked about? Michael and I really need more space. Paying rent is just throwing money down the drain. This house has 4 bedrooms, and you only use 1. It just doesn't make sense." Michael added his part. "Mom, we could help you find a nice, comfortable apartment. Something in a building with an elevator, no stairs. Safer for you. And you'd have peace of mind knowing that this house is being taken care of by family." I looked at both of them. I saw 2 strangers sitting at my table. 2 people who shared my blood but didn't have my heart. 2 human beings capable of looking a 62-year-old woman in the eye and asking her to abandon her home for their benefit. I took a deep breath. I smiled. And I told them exactly what they wanted to hear. "You're right. I've been thinking a lot about it. This house is too much for me. The stairs are tiring. The upkeep is expensive. Maybe it is time to make a change." Their faces lit up as if I had just announced they'd won the lottery. Chloe leaned forward, her eyes shining. Michael let out a sigh of relief he didn't try to hide. "Really, Mom?" Chloe almost shouted with excitement. "That's wonderful. You're making the best decision. You'll see. You'll feel so much better in a place that's more appropriate for you." Michael took my hand across the table. "I'm proud of you, Mom. I know it's not easy, but it's the right thing to do. And we are going to take care of this house like it's a treasure. I promise you." Promises. Promises again. As if my son's promises still had any value to me. I played along. I told them I needed time to organize my things. That finding a new place to live wasn't something you do overnight. That they should be patient with me. They nodded, said they understood, that there was no rush. But I saw the anxiety in their eyes. I saw how Chloe was already imagining her furniture in my living room, her clothes in my closets, her life in my house. The following days were pure acting. I pretended to look for apartments. I printed out brochures for places I would never visit and left them on the table for them to see when they came over. I made comments about how hard it was to find something good and affordable. Chloe offered to help. She said she could look for options, that she knew real estate agents, that she had contacts. Of course, she had contacts. She had probably already calculated how much it would cost to get rid of me as cheaply as possible, while they thought I was looking for a place to move. The sale of my house was moving forward without them suspecting a thing. Susan worked with impressive efficiency. The papers were signed. The inspection was done. The money was deposited into a new account I opened specifically for this transaction. $430,000 appeared in my bank account one Wednesday morning. I sat in front of the computer, staring at that number on the screen. $430,000. It was more money than I had ever seen together in my entire life. It was freedom in the form of numbers. It was the price of 30 years of sacrifice. It was proof that Arthur and I had built something valuable. And it was mine. All mine. The closing date for the house was set for 2 weeks later. The buyers needed that time to organize their move from another city. Susan suggested I start packing my personal things little by little so as not to raise suspicion. But I had a different plan. I wasn't going to pack anything. I wasn't going to give any sign that something was changing. I was going to keep everything exactly the same until the last moment. And when that moment came, Michael and Chloe would get the surprise of their lives. I hired a moving company with a special condition. They would come on a specific day, a Tuesday morning, and they had exactly 4 hours to get all my belongings out of the house. I gave them a detailed list of what to take. Furniture I had bought myself, personal items, photographs, clothes, important documents, everything that was mine by right. The rest could stay, as it was part of the sale. I also rented a storage unit to temporarily keep my things while I decided on my next step. I was in no hurry to settle down anywhere. For the first time in my life, I had money, time, and freedom to choose. I could move to another city, another country even. The world had opened up in front of me in a way I never imagined. Michael and Chloe continued to visit regularly. Their visits had become more frequent and longer. Chloe brought interior design magazines and showed me pictures of how she wanted to remodel some of the rooms. Michael talked about installing a new security system, changing some windows, building a deck in the yard. They talked about my house as if it were already theirs. They planned their future within these walls without any shame. And I let them. I listened to them talk for hours about their projects, their dreams, their plans. Every word they said was another nail in the coffin of our relationship. Every fake smile from Chloe was one more reason not to regret what I was doing. One afternoon, 10 days before the closing date, I decided it was time to execute the last part of my plan. The most painful part, but also the most necessary. I had to confront them in a way that made everything clear, so there would be no doubt why I was doing this. I summoned them to my house on a Saturday afternoon. I told them I needed to talk to them about something important related to the house. They arrived on time, with that poorly disguised anxiety of someone expecting good news. They sat in the living room, on the same sofa where they had spent so many afternoons planning my eviction. I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told them I had been thinking a lot about everything we had discussed. That they were right, this house was too big for me. That maintaining it was costly and tiring. That I had made a decision. I saw their faces light up. Chloe leaned forward. Michael smiled. They thought I was finally going to tell them the house was theirs. But then I continued. I told them I had decided to sell the house, that I had already found buyers, that the deal was closed and the money was already in my account, that in 2 weeks the new owners would be taking possession of the property. The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Chloe looked at me as if I had spoken in another language. Michael opened his mouth, but no sound came out. They just sat there, frozen, processing what they had just heard. Then they exploded, both at the same time. Chloe jumped to her feet, screaming about how I could do this, that they had been waiting, planning, trusting that this house would be for them. Michael yelled at me that it was a betrayal, that he was my only son, that this house should have been his inheritance. I let them scream. I let them vent. When they finally fell silent, exhausted from their own tantrum, I spoke with a calmness that surprised even me. I told them this house was never their inheritance as long as I was alive, that it was my property, and I could do whatever I wanted with it. That if they had truly loved me, if they had truly cared about my well-being and not just my assets, things would have been different. But for 2 years, I had watched them act like vultures, waiting for me to disappear so they could take what was mine. Chloe tried to deny it. She said I was wrong, that they loved me, that they were just worried about me. But her voice was shaking. Her eyes avoided mine. Michael remained silent, his jaw tight and his fists clenched. I reminded them of every conversation where they had pressured me to leave, every comment about how big the house was, every suggestion of a retirement home, every greedy look from Chloe as she scanned my walls, every plan they had made, thinking I wasn't listening. Then Chloe switched tactics. She started to cry. She said I was being cruel, that they had pinned their future on this house. How could I do this to them? That I was her family. Michael joined his wife. He said I would regret this, that I would end up alone, that no one would take care of me when I really needed it. Their words were like stones thrown in anger, but they didn't hurt me anymore. I had already cried all the tears I had to cry. I had suffered through all the sleepless nights. I had carried the pain of their betrayal until that pain transformed into determination. There was no turning back. They left, slamming the door. Chloe was crying hysterically. Michael looked at me with a hatred I had never seen in his eyes. He shouted that this wasn't over, that he would find a way to stop the sale, that he would talk to lawyers. I let him threaten me. I knew that legally he had no power. The house was in my name. The sale was legal and final. There was nothing he could do except that he had lost something that was never his. That night, I slept better than I had in months. For the first time in a long time, I didn't have nightmares. I didn't wake up with that weight on my chest. I felt something like peace. The next few days were strange. Michael didn't call. Chloe didn't show up. The silence of their absence was deafening, but also liberating. I didn't miss them. I missed the son I thought I had, not the greedy man he had become. But 3 days before the house closing, I received a call. It was Michael. His voice sounded different, calmer, almost kind. He said he had been thinking, that maybe he had reacted badly, that he understood my decision, even if it hurt, that he wanted to see me one last time before I left the house. I was immediately suspicious, but I agreed. Curiosity, perhaps. Or that part of me that still wanted to believe that some of the son I raised was still in there. He arrived alone, without Chloe. He sat across from me with an expression that looked like remorse. He said he was sorry for how things had turned out, that he really did love me, that he had let Chloe influence him too much, that he recognized his mistakes, that he hoped one day we could have a relationship again. He spoke with a sincerity that almost convinced me. Almost. But then came the real reason for his visit. He said he understood the house was sold and there was no going back. But he was asking me to at least consider giving them a part of the money from the sale. Not all of it, just a part. Something to help them make a down payment on their own house. After all, he was my only son. And we had built that house with him in mind, too. There it was, the true face behind the mask of regret. He hadn't come to reconcile. He had come to negotiate, to see if he could get something out of this situation. If not the whole house, at least a piece of the money. I looked at him for a long time without saying anything. I saw in his eyes that same calculating look I had seen in Chloe's so many times. I wondered how much of my real son was left in there, if the son I thought I knew ever really existed. I told him no, that the money was mine, that I needed it for my future, for my old age, to live with dignity for the time I had left, that if he had thought of me as his mother and not as a resource, maybe things would be different. But he had made his choices, and now he had to live with the consequences. Michael stood up abruptly. The mask of remorse fell away completely. He told me I was selfish, that I had become bitter since my husband died, that I was throwing away our relationship for money, that I didn't deserve to be called a mother. His words cut through me, but they didn't break me. I was already past the point where his insults could hurt me. I asked him to leave. He left without looking back, slamming the door again, making the pictures on the walls tremble. 2 days later, moving day arrived. The company I hired showed up promptly at 8 o'clock in the morning. 4 efficient men worked non-stop for 3.5 hours. They took out my furniture, my boxes of memories, my clothes, my books. Everything I had marked beforehand left that house and was loaded onto the truck, bound for the storage unit. I walked through the empty rooms when they finished. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors I had cleaned thousands of times. I ran my hand along the walls that held 30 years of memories, good and bad. I saw the marks on the wall where Michael measured his height every birthday until he was 12 years old. I saw the stain on the kitchen ceiling from a leak years ago that Arthur spent an entire weekend fixing. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. This house had been my home, but now it was just a building. Homes are built with love and respect, not with walls and ceilings. And this house had stopped being a home the day my son decided it was worth more as property than as a symbol of what his father and I built together. I went out into the yard one last time. The rose bushes Arthur had planted were still there, blooming, unaware they would soon have new owners. I went over to them, cut one red rose, and took it with me. It would be my way of carrying a piece of the good memories. The next day, the final closing papers were signed. The new owners received the keys. The house was officially no longer mine. Susan congratulated me on my courage. She told me that not many women my age had the nerve to make such radical decisions. She asked me what I would do now, where I would go. I told her I still didn't know for sure, that maybe I would travel for a while, that I had a friend in another city who had invited me to visit, that for the first time in my life I didn't have to answer to anyone, that I was free. But before I left, before I closed this chapter completely, there was one last thing to do, the part I had been waiting for with a mixture of anxiety and satisfaction. The moment Michael and Chloe would discover the whole truth. During all these days, since that fight in my living room, I hadn't spoken to them. I ignored their calls. I didn't answer their messages. I let the silence do its work. I let the uncertainty eat at them. And now, with the house sold and my things safe, it was time to deliver the final blow. I called them, both of them. I told them I needed to see them one last time, that I had something for them, something related to the house. My voice must have sounded convincing because they agreed to come immediately. They probably thought I had changed my mind about the money, that maybe I would give them something after all. I had them meet me at a coffee shop near what had been my house. They arrived together. With that poorly hidden look of expectation, Chloe was carrying a large bag, as if she were prepared to carry something away. Michael seemed nervous, but hopeful. They sat across from me. We ordered coffee. Chloe got straight to the point, asking me why I had called them. Michael tried to act casual, but I could see his hands trembling slightly around his cup. Then I took an envelope out of my purse. I put it on the table between us. I told them that since they had insisted so much on having a part of my house, I had decided to give them something. That inside that envelope was what they needed. Chloe practically lunged for the envelope. She tore it open with anxious hands. Inside were two things: a set of keys and a piece of paper with a handwritten address. The same address as my old house. Chloe's eyes went wide. Michael read the address and looked at me, confused. Chloe shouted in surprise, asking if this meant what she thought it meant. If I was giving them the house after all. I smiled. I told them yes, that they had insisted so much on having my house that I had decided to give it to them, that those keys opened the front door, that they could go whenever they wanted, that the house was all theirs now. Chloe almost cried with joy. Michael looked stunned, unable to believe what he was hearing. He asked me if I was sure, if I was serious. I told him I had never been more certain of anything in my life. They stood up so fast they nearly knocked over their coffee cups. Chloe clutched the keys in her pocket as if they were the most precious treasure in the world. Michael tried to hug me, but I pulled away. I told them they could go, to go see their new house, to enjoy what they had wanted so badly. They practically ran out of the coffee shop. I watched them get into their car through the window. Chloe took out the keys and looked at them again and again. Michael was driving fast, probably anxious to get there. They left without looking back, without a real thank you, with nothing but the satisfaction of having gotten what they wanted. I stayed seated in that coffee shop, drinking my coffee slowly. I looked at the clock. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I mentally calculated how long it would take them to get to the house. 15 minutes, maybe. Another 5 to park and walk to the entrance. In about 20 minutes, they would be standing at the front door. I ordered another coffee. I was in no hurry. I knew exactly what was about to happen, and I wanted to savor it from a distance. I pictured the scene. Michael and Chloe arriving, excited, taking out the keys, walking up to the entrance with that feeling of victory. And then they would see it. The large sign hammered into the lawn. Sold. In red letters. Impossible to ignore. I imagined their faces when they realized. When they tried to put the keys in the lock and discovered they didn't work because the locks had already been changed by the new owners. When they looked through the windows and saw that the house was completely empty, without my furniture, without my things, without anything to indicate I had ever lived there. 20 minutes after they left, my phone started to ring. It was Michael. I didn't answer. It kept ringing. 1, 2, 3 times. Then Chloe. Then Michael again. I let it ring while I calmly finished my second coffee. The text messages started coming in, confused at first, then desperate, then furious. Mom, what does this mean? The house has a sold sign. The keys don't work. What is going on? Mom, answer the phone. This is a joke. Mom, please explain. What did you do? Where are you? I need to talk to you now. I read every message with a calmness that surprised me. I felt no guilt. I felt no regret. I felt something like justice, like liberation. Like that moment when you finally take control of your own life after years of letting others decide for you. I waited a full hour before responding. A single, short, direct message. The house is sold. I gave it to you, just like you wanted. Now it's your problem what to do with that information. Enjoy your inheritance. The phone exploded with calls. I blocked their numbers. The messages kept coming through other channels. Social media, emails, messages from unknown numbers that were clearly them using other people's phones. I blocked everything. I cut off all forms of communication. That night, I stayed in a hotel. A simple but comfortable room. I took a long bath. I ordered room service. I watched a movie I had wanted to see for months but never had the time. For the first time in years, I didn't think about what Michael was doing. If he had eaten dinner. If he needed anything. If he was okay. I thought about me. Only me. And it felt strangely liberating. The next morning, while I was having breakfast in the hotel restaurant, I saw I had a message from a number I hadn't blocked. It was Barbara, Chloe's mother. The message was long and filled with barely disguised insults. She called me selfish, cruel, a bad mother. She said I had destroyed the future of two hard-working young people who just wanted to get ahead. That I would regret this when I was old and sick with no one to care for me. I deleted the message without replying. Her words didn't affect me. They were coming from the same person who had walked into my house to criticize my curtains and my walls while planning with her daughter how to take over my property. The following days were silent. Michael and Chloe finally understood that I wasn't going to answer, that there would be no conversation, that there was no going back. They probably consulted with lawyers and discovered what I already knew, that everything I did was completely legal, that the house was mine and I had every right to sell it, that they had no valid claim. I moved in temporarily with Susan, my real estate agent, who during this process had become something of a friend. She had a large house with a guest room that she offered me while I decided on my next step. She was a widow, like me, with no children, and she understood perfectly the difference between chosen solitude and imposed loneliness. We sat on her patio every afternoon, drinking tea and talking about life. I told her my whole story. She told me hers. She had been through something similar with her brother, who tried to cheat her out of her inheritance after her husband died. She had learned the hard way that family doesn't always mean loyalty. One afternoon, 2 weeks after the day Michael and Chloe found the house sold, Susan asked me what I planned to do with my life now. I had money. I had my health. I had freedom. The world was open to me in a way it hadn't been in decades. I told her I had been thinking about traveling, that there were places I always wanted to see but never could, because I was always busy taking care of others. Europe, maybe. Italy, France, Spain. Places where I could walk down ancient streets and get lost among tourists without anyone knowing who I was or where I came from. Susan smiled and told me that was exactly the right answer, that I had spent too many years living for others and it was time to live for myself. She helped me plan. She showed me websites with travel packages for seniors, organized groups where I could meet people my age with similar stories. I booked a 3-month trip through Europe. I would leave in 1 month. I would visit 10 different countries. I would stay in small, cozy hotels. I would eat local food. I would meet new people. I would just be Eleanor, a 62-year-old woman enjoying her freedom, not Eleanor the abandoned mother, not Eleanor the victim of her family's greed. While I planned my trip, tucked away in my new temporary reality, I sometimes thought about Michael, not the selfish man he had become, but the boy he was. The 7-year-old who hugged me when he had nightmares. The teenager who gave me flowers with his first paycheck. The young man who cried in my arms the day his father died. I wondered at what point that boy disappeared. At what point love turned into self-interest. If I was to blame for spoiling him too much. For giving him everything without teaching him the value of things. for showing him that love is bought with sacrifices and money instead of teaching him that love is shown with presence and respect. Maybe I created the monster. Maybe in trying to be the best mother possible, I ended up being the worst. But I also understood that at some point, Michael stopped being just a product of my upbringing and became an adult responsible for his own decisions, and his decisions led him to lose me. One night, 3 weeks after everything, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me. It was Michael. His voice sounded broken, tired, different from all the other times. "Mom? Please don't hang up. I just need you to listen for a minute." I stayed silent. I didn't hang up, but I didn't say anything either, he continued. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know I ruined everything, but I need you to know that I've been thinking a lot about everything, about how I treated you, about what I did, about what I lost." He took a long pause. I heard his ragged breath on the other end of the line. "Chloe and I are separating. Not just because of the house, although that was the final straw, but because I realized a lot of things. About how I let her convince me of things I knew were wrong. About how I treated you like you were an obstacle instead of my mother." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking for us to go back to what we were, because I know that's impossible. I just wanted to tell you I'm sorry, that I understand why you did what you did, that I probably would have done the same thing in your place." His voice broke at the end. He sounded like he was crying. Part of me, that maternal part that never fully dies, wanted to comfort him. But the other part, the part that had learned to protect itself, held firm. "Thank you for saying that, Michael," I said, my voice calm but without emotion. "I hope this experience has taught you something valuable about life and about how to treat the people who love you." There was a long silence after my words. Michael was breathing heavily on the other end of the line. I could imagine him sitting somewhere dark, maybe in the apartment he shared with Chloe, surrounded by the consequences of his own decisions. "Are you going far away?" he finally asked in a small voice. "Am I going to lose you forever?" "You already lost me, Michael. You lost me the day you decided my house was worth more than my company. You lost me every time you looked at me as an obstacle instead of as your mother. You lost me when you let your wife plan my eviction while I was cooking for you in my own kitchen." I heard a choked sob. "Mom, please, don't call me that. You don't have the right anymore. I spent 62 years of my life being a mother. I sacrificed everything for that title. And you trampled on it as if it were worthless. Now, I'm going to spend the rest of my days being simply Eleanor, a free woman who no longer owes anything to anyone." I hung up before he could answer. My hands were shaking, but not from weakness. They were shaking from the strength it took to say those words. For years, I had been unable to set boundaries, to say no, to prioritize my needs over those of others. And now, finally, I had found my voice. That night, Susan and I had dinner in her dining room. She made a delicious pasta with homemade tomato sauce. We opened a bottle of wine she had been saving for a special occasion. We toasted to new beginnings, to second chances, to women who learned to choose themselves without asking for permission. She told me she had also been through a similar process. Her younger brother had tried to take the inheritance their father left them, manipulating documents and lying about their father's last wishes. Susan had to go to court, face her own family, endure insults and threats, but in the end, she won. Not just legally, but emotionally. She learned that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, and that sometimes the family we choose is more real than the family we're given. The next few days, I was busy preparing for my trip. I bought new clothes. Not many, just what was necessary. I wanted to travel light, without the weight of material things or emotional baggage. I bought a good-sized but manageable suitcase. I took out my passport, which had been sitting in a drawer, unused, for years. I made all the necessary reservations. One afternoon, while checking my email, I found a message from Chloe. She had managed to get my email address somehow. The message was long, dramatic, and full of accusations and pleas mixed together chaotically. She told me I had ruined her life, that Michael was depressed and it was my fault, that they had only wanted what was best for me by suggesting a smaller, safer place, that I had misinterpreted their intentions, that the house would have been in good hands with them, that now Michael blamed her for everything and their marriage was destroyed. How could I sleep at night knowing the damage I had caused? I read the entire message without feeling anything at all. Not guilt, not satisfaction, not anger, just a quiet emptiness where the pain used to be. I deleted the email without replying. Chloe could say whatever she wanted. She could blame me for everything. It didn't affect me anymore because I had stopped caring about her opinion the day I heard her call me old and stubborn on the phone. 2 weeks before my trip, while I was walking through the market buying a few things, I ran into a neighbor from my old house. Her name was Megan, and she had lived 3 houses down for 15 years. We had exchanged occasional greetings but were never close. "Eleanor, what a surprise to see you here," she said with a genuine smile. "I heard you sold your house. The new owners seem very nice." I nodded. Yes, I decided it was time for a change. Megan leaned in closer and lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. "You know, your daughter-in-law came to my house a few days ago. She was looking for you. She seemed pretty upset. I told her I didn't know where you were, and she left in a huff." "Did she say anything else?" I asked out of curiosity. "She said you had done something terrible, that you had taken away her future. Honestly, it seemed very strange to me. That house was yours, not hers." Megan paused and then added, "I always thought that girl looked at your property with a little too much interest, like she already owned it. I'm glad you did what you had to do." Her words comforted me in an unexpected way. Sometimes you need an outsider to validate what you already know in your heart, that you're not crazy, that you're not the villain of the story, that your perceptions were correct. We talked for a few more minutes. I told her I was leaving for a trip to Europe. Her eyes lit up. She said she had always wanted to do something like that, but never dared, that she admired me for having the courage to start over at my age. We said goodbye with a warm, sincere hug. That night, I found an old box I had rescued from the house before selling it. Inside were photographs. Many photographs from different times in my life. Michael as a baby in Arthur's arms. Michael on his first day of school in that uniform that was too big for him. Michael graduating from college in his cap and gown. Michael on his wedding day, smiling next to Chloe. I looked at those photos for a long time. They were memories of a life that now seemed to belong to someone else. To a younger, more naive Eleanor, more willing to sacrifice everything for love. That Eleanor didn't exist anymore. She had died slowly over 2 years of humiliation and contempt, and in her place, this new version had been born. Stronger, more aware, more selfish, in the good sense of the word. I took the photos of Michael as an adult and put them aside. The ones of him with Chloe went straight into the trash. I didn't need to remember that chapter. But the photos of Michael as a child, those I kept, because that child had been real. That love had been genuine. And even though the adult had disappointed me deeply, the child deserved to be remembered. A week before my trip, I received another call. This time from a number I recognized as a law office. My heart sped up, thinking Michael had found some way to sue me. But it was something completely different. "Mrs. Eleanor Vance?" a professional woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is she. I'm calling from the firm of Zamora and Associates. We have information regarding your deceased husband, Arthur Vance. There is a pending matter related to a life insurance policy that was never claimed." I was speechless. A life insurance policy? Arthur had been dead for 10 years. I never knew of any insurance beyond the basic one that paid for the funeral and some immediate expenses. The lawyer explained that Arthur had taken out a small life insurance policy through his work years before he died. The company had gone bankrupt, and the case had gotten complicated legally. After years of paperwork, they had finally located the beneficiaries of the unclaimed policies. I was one of them. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked, still in shock. $50,000? Mrs. Vance. Plus accumulated interest. Approximately $60,000 in total. I had to sit down. $60,000 I never knew existed. $60,000 that Arthur had set aside, thinking of protecting me. One last gift from a man who had been in the ground for 10 years but was still taking care of me from wherever he was. The paperwork took 3 days. I had to sign documents, present identification, prove I was who I said I was. But in the end, the money was deposited into my account. I now had almost $500,000 in total, a fortune for a woman who had spent most of her life counting pennies and denying herself basic pleasures. It was more money than I would need to live comfortably for the rest of my days. It was absolute freedom in the form of numbers on a screen. That night, I called Susan and told her about the insurance. She was as thrilled as I was. We opened another bottle of wine and toasted to Arthur, to his foresight, to his love that transcended death. We talked late into the night about the irony of the situation. Michael had lost an inheritance of over $500,000 because of his greed. If he had been patient, if he had treated me well, if he had truly loved me as a son and not as an heir, all that money would have been his one day. But his avarice left him with nothing. Life has curious ways of serving justice. The last few days before my trip were spent in a strange calm. There was no more drama, no more desperate calls. Michael and Chloe had finally understood that there was no going back. I had become a ghost to them, and they had become strangers to me. Susan drove me to the airport on the day of my departure. We had developed a genuine friendship over these weeks. She had been my support, my confidant, the sister I never had. I promised her I would write from every city I visited, that I would send her postcards, that when I returned, if I returned, we would still be friends. We hugged at the airport security gate. She had tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. Go and be happy, Eleanor. Go and find out who you are when nobody needs you. Go and live the life you deserve. The flight was long but peaceful. I read a book I had bought about women who started over after 60. Inspiring stories of women who left toxic marriages, who pursued deferred dreams, who reinvented themselves when everyone thought it was too late. I saw myself reflected in every story. My first stop was Rome, the Eternal City. I arrived at night, and the taxi took me to a small hotel near Trastevere. The room was cozy, with windows that opened onto a cobblestone street where I could hear the sound of people dining in the restaurants below. I showered, put on comfortable clothes, and went for a walk. I had no specific destination. I just wanted to feel the city. I walked through narrow streets illuminated by warm lights. I passed ancient fountains where water still flowed after centuries. I saw young couples holding hands, families dining on terraces, old men sitting on benches, watching life go by. I went into a small trattoria that smelled of garlic and basil. I ordered pasta, carbonara, and a glass of red wine. I sat alone at a table by the window and ate slowly, savoring every bite. There was no one asking me if the food was good, no one waiting for me to serve others first, no one judging my choices. It was just me, my plate of pasta, and the most delicious freedom I had ever tasted. That night, back in my hotel room, I stood in front of the mirror. I looked at the woman staring back at me. 62 years old, graying hair that I no longer bothered to dye, wrinkles around my eyes that told stories of laughter and tears, age-spotted hands that had worked tirelessly for decades, a body that had given birth, that had loved, that had suffered, that had endured. This woman in the mirror was a survivor. She was someone who had hit rock bottom and decided to get up, someone who chose her own happiness over the approval of others, someone who learned that true love doesn't make you feel small, that real family doesn't use you. That saying no is an act of self-love, not selfishness. I spoke to that woman in the mirror. I told her I was proud of her, that she had made the right decisions, even though they hurt, that she deserved every moment of peace that was to come, that she no longer had to justify herself to anyone, that her life belonged completely to her. The following weeks were a beautiful blur of new experiences. I visited the Colosseum and thought about all the lives that had passed through that place. I threw a coin into the Trevi fountain, not making a wish, but giving thanks for this moment. I ate gelato in Piazza Navona while street artists painted portraits of tourists. From Rome, I traveled to Florence. I walked across the Ponte Vecchio at sunset. I saw Michelangelo's David and was moved to tears by so much beauty. I ate bistecca alla Fiorentina in a hidden restaurant recommended by the hotel owner. Every day was a small adventure. Every night was a quiet victory. In Florence, I met a group of women from Argentina who were also traveling alone. We met on a tour of the Uffizi Gallery and ended up having dinner together. We all had similar stories. Difficult divorces, ungrateful children, years lost taking care of others. And now we were all here, reclaiming our time, reclaiming ourselves. One of them, named Sophia, told me something that stuck with me. We spend so much time being what others need that we forget who we are. This trip isn't just tourism, it's a reunion with ourselves. She was right. Every day that passed, I felt lighter, as if I were shedding layers of responsibility and guilt that I had carried for decades. I started sleeping better, smiling more, not thinking about Michael for days at a time. From Florence, I went to Venice. The floating city welcomed me with its decadent and melancholy beauty. I took a vaporetto down the Grand Canal. I got intentionally lost in narrow alleys. I fed pigeons in Streetmark Square. I had a ridiculously expensive coffee at Café Florian, just for the experience. One afternoon, while sitting in a small cafe overlooking a canal, I received a message from Susan. She told me that Michael had gone looking for her, that he had asked about me. He wanted to know if I was okay, where I was, when I would be back. Susan told him that I was perfectly fine, but that she would not give him any more information, that she would respect my privacy. Michael left without pressing further. I read the message without feeling anything in particular. No satisfaction that he was looking for me, no guilt for not responding, just a quiet indifference. Michael was part of my past, a closed chapter. He no longer had power over my emotions. I replied to Susan, thanking her for protecting my space. I told her about Venice, about the women from Argentina I had met, about how I felt more like myself with every day I spent away from my old life. I continued my journey. Paris, with its Eiffel Tower and its cafes smelling of fresh croissants. Barcelona, with its unfinished Sagrada Familia and its delicious tapas. Madrid, with its museums full of art that made me cry from its beauty. Each city was a gift. Each experience was proof that life doesn't end at 60, that the best chapter might still be unwritten. In Barcelona, I met a man. His name was Robert. He was 65 years old. He had been a widower for 5 years. We met on a tour of Park Güell. He was traveling alone too. We had lunch together after the tour, then dinner, then breakfast the next day. It wasn't romance. It was genuine companionship. Someone who understood chosen solitude. Someone who was also rediscovering himself after years of living for others. We became friends. When we each went our separate ways, we exchanged numbers. We agreed to keep in touch, and we did. Occasional messages, photos of our travels, a friendship without expectations or obligations. The 3 months flew by. I visited the 10 countries, and a few more I added along the way. Every experience transformed me a little more. Every conversation with strangers who became temporary friends reminded me that the world was full of good people, that not everyone uses you, that kindness exists without conditions. When I finally returned, I didn't go back to the city where I had lived my whole life. I decided to settle in a new place, a coastal city about 3 hours away. I bought a small apartment with an ocean view, 2 bedrooms, a large balcony where I could watch the sunsets, and enough space for me and no one else. Susan came to visit me the first month. We walked barefoot on the beach. With our feet in the cold water, I told her all about my trip, about the women I met, about Robert and our uncomplicated friendship, about how I had learned to be alone without feeling lonely. She told me that Michael had continued to ask about me during my absence, that eventually he stopped, that she had heard through the grapevine that he and Chloe had officially divorced, that Michael had moved to another city too, that he seemed to be rebuilding his life. I felt nothing hearing that. Not relief, not sadness, just acceptance. Michael would go his way, and I would go mine. Maybe someday we would meet again. Maybe not. It didn't matter to me in the way it used to. My new life was quiet but full. I joined a book club where I met wonderful women my age. I took painting classes, something I always wanted to do but never had time for. I walked on the beach every morning. I cooked just for myself and enjoyed every meal without rushing. Robert came to visit me 6 months after I returned. He stayed for a week. We walked on the beach. We had dinner at local restaurants. We talked about our past lives and our future plans. On the last day of his visit, as we were having coffee on my balcony watching the sunset, he asked me if I would ever forgive my son. I thought about it for a long time before answering. I don't know if forgive is the right word. What he did was unforgivable in many ways. He treated me like an object, like something to be used and discarded. But I don't carry hatred either. Hate is too heavy, and I've carried enough weight in my life. So, what is it? Robert asked with genuine curiosity. I think it's indifference. And maybe that's worse for him than hatred, because hatred means I still care. Indifference means I've moved on, that I've built a life where he no longer has a place. Robert nodded, understanding. Then he added something that made me think. Sometimes the best gift we can give to those who hurt us is our happiness, because it proves they didn't break us, that we survived, that we're stronger than they thought. He was right. My happiness wasn't revenge. It was liberation. It was proof that I was worth more than the role others assigned me. That being a mother wasn't my only identity. That Eleanor existed beyond her relationships with others. A year after moving to the coast, on an ordinary day while I was watering the plants on my balcony, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but something made me answer. Mom? Michael's voice sounded different, more mature, more tired, less arrogant. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch between us. I know I have no right to call you. I know you should probably hang up, but I need to tell you something, and then I won't bother you again if that's what you want. I heard his breathing on the other end. He was nervous. I've spent this past year in therapy, trying to understand how I became the person I was with you, how I could treat you that way, and I've come to understand a lot of things. None of them are excuses, but at least now I understand. He paused, waiting for me to say something. I remained silent. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect us to have a relationship again. I just needed to tell you that I finally get what I lost. And I'm not talking about the house or the money. I'm talking about you, about your presence, about your unconditional love that I trampled on as if it were worthless. His voice cracked slightly. I met someone new, a good woman who is teaching me what real love means. And every time she treats me with genuine kindness, I think about how you treated me like that my entire life, and I paid you back with greed and contempt. Every time she takes care of me when I'm sick, I remember all the nights you stayed up taking care of me as a child. And it hurts. It hurts so much to realize what I had and what I destroyed. He took a deep breath. I'm not asking you for anything. I just wanted you to know that I was wrong, that you were right about everything. That if I could go back in time and change my actions, I would, but I can't. So all I can say is I'm sorry. And I hope that wherever you are, you're happy. You deserve it more than anyone. There was a long silence. Finally, I spoke. Thank you for saying that, Michael. I appreciate your honesty, and I'm glad to know you're working on being a better person. I wish you the best in your life. I really do. Does that mean? His voice had a hint of hope. It means I don't hold a grudge. But it also means that my life is here now. I've built something new, something that is just mine, and there's no room in it for the pain of the past. I understand. His voice sounded resigned, but also relieved. I just wanted you to know that I think about you, that I miss you, and that if you ever decide you want to try anything, I'll be here. Goodbye, Michael. Take care of yourself. Goodbye, Mom. I hung up and stood there, looking at the ocean. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sadness or any particular relief. I just felt closure. Michael had said what he needed to say. I had listened, and now we could both move on. Maybe someday, in a few years, when the wounds were completely scarred over, we could try to rebuild something. Not the mother-son relationship we had before, because that was broken beyond repair, but maybe something new, something based on mutual respect and clear boundaries. Or maybe not, and that was okay too. I sat in my favorite balcony chair with a hot cup of tea. The sun was setting, painting the sky in oranges and pinks. The waves broke gently on the beach. A cool breeze brought the smell of salt and freedom. I thought about the entire journey. About the Eleanor I was 2 years ago, living in a big house but feeling smaller and smaller. The woman who let herself be manipulated because she didn't know how to set boundaries. The mother who believed love meant sacrificing everything, including her dignity. That woman didn't exist anymore. In her place was someone stronger. Someone who learned that loving yourself isn't selfish. That saying enough doesn't make you a bad person. That you can love your family and still choose yourself. That blood doesn't justify emotional abuse. That we deserve respect not for what we can give, but simply for existing. Today, I don't need permission to live. I don't need external validation to feel valuable. I don't need to prove my love to anyone by sacrificing my peace. Today, I simply exist on my own terms. And that is enough, more than enough. It's everything. I took a sip of my tea and smiled at the horizon. I was 63 years old, money in the bank, real friends, my own projects, trips to plan, books to read, paintings to paint, sunrises to see. A whole life ahead of me, built on the rubble of the last one. What I did wasn't revenge. It was survival. It was self-love. It was the hardest and most necessary decision of my life. And I would do it again without hesitation. I got up from my chair and went inside my apartment. I put on soft music. I prepared dinner just for me. I set the table carefully, as if I were hosting the most important person in the world. Because I was. I was hosting myself, and as I ate slowly, savoring every bite, looking out the window at the ocean that was now my neighbor, I thought of all the women who were where I was, trapped in toxic family relationships, feeling guilty for wanting more, believing they have no options, thinking it's too late to start over. To them, I would say this: it is never too late. You are never too old. You have never given too much that you can't recover. Your life belongs to you. Your happiness is your responsibility, and choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish. It makes you free. I finished my dinner and went back out to the balcony. The night had fallen completely. The stars were beginning to appear in the dark sky. The sound of the waves was like an eternal lullaby. I closed my eyes and breathed deep. The salt air filled my lungs. And in that moment, on that balcony, facing the sea, thousands of miles from where my story began, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right decisions. This was my life now. And it was exactly as it was supposed to be.